or odors, et cetera, et cetera. So once again, hit on the educational component with another piece of information in addition to the right to farm ordinance. I talked about the right to farm ordinance, about amending our subdivision regulations, which we do have agricultural management plan requirement in county subdivision regulations that kind of once again gets at this component of it. It leads in by talking about once again the important economic value that agricultural operations have in the county, and how we may, the planning board or the county commissioners, do some things to protect the economic viability of agriculture in the county. One of those key components, and once again, not to bore you, read a section out of there that talks about that to ensure that sufficient land is available to use for agricultural purposes and support ag-related businesses, the planning board or governing body require that a percentage of land is proposed to be available for ag opportunities, and we asked that a deed restriction or covenant be placed on some of that. And if the particular landowner is not interested in actively using land for agriculture, that they would make it available to lease at market prices for ag uses by potentially neighbors. We have used that on one occasion on a large acreage development proposed up on the Big Hole River here a few years ago, and are in their second 3-year ag management plan that they have entered into with the commissioners. This development was done about 6 years ago. We had them turn in a 3-year plan. It was done 3 years ago and runs through this year. So we are using that, and that particular development is farming and ranching a great deal of what of the common ground that the landowners get to take advantage of. So a number of other sort of items that we've routinely require for subdivision plat approval as our conditions of approval. Again, it is educational in nature, but also to mitigate potential impacts. We require a division, whether 1 acre or 1 lot or 100 lots, to develop a 3-year noxious weed management plan for that piece of ground that is in conjunction with our county weed department and needs to be signed off by them. We also have language pretty standard that requires that household pets need to be confined to the landowner's lot or property or kept under control. We don't want chasing the neighbor's sheep. We hear a lot about that, so we try to mitigate with required covenant language. And then also a pamphlet and brochure from the NRCS. If you're going to allow large animals on a tract of land, it's geared at folks with the small acreage lots that feel the need to have horses and maybe a few cows, that they develop a safe stocking rate determination and confinement plan based on information that we provide to them that's available through the NRCS that walks you through how to determine an AUM based on your soil's productivity, the rainfall, whether you're going to irrigate it or not. Instead of just grazing it 10 acres down to what's like a pool table, you have to confine and remove those animals for a period of time so that you don't damage the resource. So those are some of the items that we've put in place here in Beaverhead County. Once again, it would be nice to have something akin to friends to the north, Jefferson County, where they have an initiated agricultural zone district of 160 acres or greater in parts of their county. We haven't got there yet, so this is what we're using.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rick. I don't know if anybody has questions for Rick. We have a couple minutes here if anyone wants to think on something. I do have a question to kind of get the ball rolling, Rick. I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit about the catalyst for passing the subdivision regulations. But, you said there was a proposal for a large subdivision. What exactly was the community response, and how did this speak to the decision makers?
Well, even back there's language in that right farm ordinance from 2004 that said we would try to do something like this. It was adopted in 2004, and we go back 6 years when this proposal came in up on the Big Hole River. So that, if my math is correct, that's what, maybe like 2010, something like that. So it was hand in hand, and we had previously reviewed our regulations in anticipation of a proposal for up the Big Hole River. Once again, bought up a big block of farmland that had center pivots, actively being raising cattle, livestock, grazing, and we wanted to kind of get ahead of that and put language in our ordinance. So, and it's been well accepted. The agricultural members of our county planning board have a bit of a problem with this. Like I said, it's a one-on-one, and it's something that we have primarily to the governing body. They're the ultimate decision makers. And like I said, they have one currently ongoing that's in its 6th year to retain ag presence on that piece of property that may have just been, it also happens to be a gated division, and it probably covered somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 acres bottom ground on the Big Hole River that was being irrigated and farmed and grazed and hay being raised on it. So that's still taking place. And are also a number of subdivision lots and seasonal residences there. They built a lodge, and they still maintain that ag presence on that piece of property.
We have a question that just came in. Where do you determine the percentage of land to be developed that must remain in agriculture?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Sure, yeah. So how do you determine the percentage of land that must remain in ag with proposed development?
As that language in our subdivision regulations, there's a bunch of information that they have to provide for us lead up to the development of this ag management plan, include things like the history of the operation, the current operation of what's going on the ranch right now, including description of the crops, livestock that's currently present, the soil survey. So it's kind of probably based on what is historically going on and what's happened on that piece of ground. Certainly if somebody was raising 120 head of cows, we're going to say you got 200 head of cows, but that's the sort of information that we gather in advance of the development of that ag management plan that the commissioners and the landowners sit down and work out together.
Great. Well, I don't know if anybody has any other questions. Oh, well, here's another one.
See one here from Linda.
Yeah, go ahead.
You have a question up there?
I have one from that shows up to you from Patrick O'Haron.
I don't have one from Patrick O'Haron. Let me read this one I got from Linda Stoll. It says that it's hard to imagine that the political environment Beaverhead County would be amenable to any type of land use restriction. Did the ag promotion parts of the county's subdivision regulations receive opposition? You're on the first part, Linda. said up front, we have not anywhere near agricultural zoning or heavy-handed, what a lot of our residents would consider. This sort of stuff did not receive any opposition. It was accepted as something that was okay, and I think it's because we go beyond the line of dealing with a particular piece of ground for a particular landowner, and it's not broad-based across the board. It's a case-by-case basis, and we didn't impose a regulation that a lot of these folks that are doing developments on their ground felt that they were impacted by. That's my best guess.
And I guess there's one question here. Are you finding covenants to be effective enforcement tools in protecting ag?
Not necessarily. I got to be honest. Sometimes people turn to the county to be the covenant cop, and zoning regulations. Covenants are something that we primarily try to leave up to the individual subdivision, their homeowners association, or those folks in that subdivision to do the enforcement on those. We do try to monitor and keep track of when made aware of, but the further away from the filing of that plat that you get maybe through the second sale of that piece of property, sometimes, especially when the landowners themselves that lives in that subdivision are not prone to enforcing that stuff. Got to be honest with you, they fall by the wayside. But I have written over, probably write 3 or 4 letters per year to folks in subdivision that says, hey, it's been brought to our attention, and our attorneys made it pretty clear that we're not going to get involved in enforcement of those covenants. Public health and safety issues, fire protection, those sort of things, sanitation, but whether he has 4 horses and isn't confining them the proper number of weeks or month, we're going to be writing a letter letting folks know they're violating the covenants and that they should be a good neighbor, and there's a reason those covenants are there. I probably do 4 of those a year.
Thank you, Rick. That's all the
Thank
questions
you.
I see right now. And so, but feel free if you have any other thoughts, folks, to just pose out. And if we have time at the end, we'll circle back. But for now, we're going to move ahead. And thanks again, Rick.
Thank you.
And we're going to move on now to Paul. And Paul, I'm going to go ahead and give you the mic.
Thanks. Thanks, Cassie, and thanks, Rick. That was fantastic to hear about some of the good work in Beaverhead County. So I work for the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition in Missoula County, and we're just going to look at some of the farmland conservation policies that we've proposed for Missoula County and hopefully are making good headway on securing in the near future. So as you all know, the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition got started on working on farmland conservation through monitoring subdivision proposals. And in 2007, we commented on a single subdivision farmland, and that's what kind of started the snowball rolling downhill. And before we knew it, we had commented on 30 subdivisions. All of those mapped on our website, which you can see the link to at the bottom. And it was really through reviewing subdivisions that we decided to step back and say we need to look at the larger issue and create a comprehensive approach to development and a comprehensive strategy to conserve farmland where it can truly support working farms and ranches, and ideally support working farms and ranches in agricultural communities. So I think a recent subdivision, actually it was just at the commissioners last week, which is a victory for agriculture, really demonstrates this need to develop a comprehensive and predictable approach. This, after reviewing 30 subdivisions, I think this was number 30, commissioners finally denied a subdivision, or actually take that back, they did not deny it, but they told the developer that they were going to deny it based on the unmitigated impacts to agriculture. So this was a 28-acre farm, and as you can see, the residential lots were going to cover all the farmland and permanently converting it to residential uses. And so, CFAC testified against it, and the planning department recommended denial, the planning board recommended denial, and it was a big victory. But at the same time, I think it shows the need to create a more predictable approach for developers to know ahead of time what's to come. And actually, I found this part fascinating with what Rick presented, was that part of the reason why the community supported some of the measures in Beaverhead County was that they were case by case. In Missoula County, we've been going a lot case by case, subdivision by subdivision, but I find that we're lacking any kind of predictability, and that is troublesome and burdensome for landowners and developers. So I guess it's kind of finding that balance between having some flexibility, but also some predictability. So what we've done is through our kind of what I would like to talk about, I guess, in addressing our comprehensive approach to farmland conservation, is to talk about some of our grassroots process for developing land use policies. Get into some of the policy details themselves to show that the multi-pronged strategy we've presented, and then a little bit about where we're at in the public process. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions before we jump to Warren Vaughan from Gallatin County. So, through reviewing the subdivision proposals for a couple of years, we saw the need to step back and try to create a comprehensive strategy to protect agricultural land. So that's our first goal there. Is how to create a comprehensive approach to conserve lands that are most viable for farming and ranching. But how do we simultaneously provide predictability to developers, planners, policymakers, and residents, because we're all stakeholders in our community, and we all deserve a fair process. How do we also facilitate producers' access to agricultural land, so we don't just conserve agricultural land that goes unused, but actually farmers and ranchers are able to access the land, which they've clearly addressed in Beaverhead County. We can definitely learn from them. And then lastly, we need to respect the interests of agricultural landowners and the equity built in their land. As you all know, a lot of these folks are land rich and cash poor, and we need to have all of this work together so that there's a fair process, our agricultural heritage is protected, but it's not done entirely on the backs of any one individual. And so with those goals in mind, we set out to do research that this I covered some of the things the data we found in Losing Ground in webinar number 2, and this report is downloadable off of our website. But after doing this research, we came up with 3 land use policy recommendations to identify agricultural cornerstone areas, and I'll speak more about what those are and show you some maps. But the idea is to protect communities of agriculture, communities of working farms and ranches. So where are the resources still intact to support communities of working farms and ranches? To mitigate the loss of farmland at the point of its conversion to other uses. And thirdly, to incentivize conservation. So the first one is our vision. It's part of the growth policy, but it's how do we create a vision for a comprehensive strategy. The second piece is the regulatory component, that when you subdivide farmland, you need to do so responsibly, and we also need to create that predictability for the landowners and developers. And then lastly, we'd like to see more incentives. So here are agricultural cornerstone areas. What we did here was map the soils and the parcel sizes, and give them a score for each. You can see, if you have your readers on, you can see that if you've got 100 acres or more, you get a score of 4, and down the line, down to 3 to 10 acres, you get 1 point. And then similarly, if you've got prime soils, you get 4 points. Soils of statewide importance, 3. etc. And so based on these scores, we mapped these lands and then drew potential cornerstones. This has not yet been approved. What we've done is create a map just to help the Missoula County visualize the concept of creating agricultural cornerstone areas. We're promoting a public process to go ahead and identify how to create agricultural cornerstone areas, but we think that we need to go beyond the current language in the growth policy, which says development should not compromise agriculture, and the community values its working farms and ranches. But we don't really show what that means, and so the cornerstones concept would help better illustrate and articulate that, and it would also help prioritize the creation of these lands. So it would affect all land use policies, all land use decisions in front of the city and county decision makers, whether it's fiscal policies, whether it's looking at subdivisions or where to build infrastructure. The cornerstone areas would help guide those decisions. This just zooms in on the Missoula Valley so you can see a little closer what we mean. Those green dotted lines are potential cornerstone areas, and that's just drawn based on how these lands scored. So looking at how do we protect the integrity of an agricultural community. So the next piece is the regulation, the farmland mitigation policy, and that's a pretty simple concept that for every acre of farmland developed, we need to conserve 1 acre of equal or greater agricultural value. So if you're going to build on 10 acres of prime farmland, you need to make sure that 10 acres are permanently protected. And this can be accomplished in a couple ways. Potentially it could be protected on-site, so if someone's going to develop 100 acres of prime farmland, then they could cluster the houses on 50 acres or less. And it wouldn't change the density of the land. It wouldn't change their actual development right, but it would influence how the subdivision itself is designed to try to have a smaller residential footprint. I really believe this 1-to-1 ratio is kind of a minimum threshold. Obviously, you could build on much less than, for example, 50 acres, and do so in a way that actually enhances the livability of the residences by having this adjacent open space, but while also protecting at least half of the fertile farmland. The other way this could be accomplished is protecting land off-site, and hopefully this actually would work in concert with the agricultural cornerstone areas. We would actually like to incentivize the conservation within the cornerstone areas. So if someone's going to develop 100 acres of prime farmland outside of the cornerstone area, potentially there could be some conservation within the cornerstone area. And it actually works better on the smaller lots. So if someone's going to develop 5 acres, it's a little bit harder for 2.5 acres of farmland while building on 2.5 acres. It probably makes more sense to protect 5 acres within a cornerstone area and go ahead and build on the 5 acres outside of the cornerstone area. So that's the second piece, the regulatory component. The key that we think here that actually a number of developers, builders, and realtors have supported this because they like the predictability of it. They're happy to, they know that farmland is a big part of the real estate economy. It's part of the quality of life in Missoula County. They also want to protect it, but they want to know what rules they're playing by. Interestingly, there's also some resistance from other realtors, as you might imagine. So that's kind of one of the tricky components that we're trying to figure out, is that balance between flexibility and predictability. The last part of our recommendations is to look at adopting a broad suite of incentives. So, luckily Missoula County already has a number of incentives. We've got an open space bond approved, which has been phenomenal for working landowners who voluntarily want to sell their development rights. And we're hoping to work with the development community in identifying more incentives that will help them do better developments. how do we help change the status quo cookie cutter model of subdivisions on farmland? And so far, we haven't been able to come up with much with them. They've, I probably shouldn't go into some of the ideas that they've proposed, but it really hasn't been all that inspiring, unfortunately, yet. But hopefully, we'll come up with some more incentives to inspire better development patterns. So where are we at in this political process, this policy process with working with local government? I'm being a little bit comical here with the image of an ant farm, but it is fascinating to try to find the right avenue in local government to have your policies considered. And we've actually made a lot of great progress working with Missoula County. I believe the city council in Missoula is willing to be at least as progressive as the Missoula County commissioners. They've said as much, and that's important because the city is kind of, pretty frequently annexes land beyond the city limits, usually on farmland, and then approves the development there. So it is important to have the city on board, but most of the farmland is in the county. So the commissioners have asked a committee of landowners from across the whole county to consider our policies and to make recommendations to them. So they're in that process right now. It'll then go to the planning board. We'll continue to work with both the rural initiatives and the Office of Planning and Grants to come up with some to refine the policy proposals and engage the public in coming up with what makes the most sense. But that's kind of where we're at right now, and hopefully we'll have something on the book. I hope that we have something on the books by the end of the summer, and to guide all future growth. So I think I'm out of time. Kathy, if there's any time for questions right now, happy to take them, but I also don't want to cut Warren short, so if there's time at the end, I could take questions as well.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Paul. I think it was one question, so why don't we just go ahead and take it now real quick. Paul, the 1-to-1 ratio for ag mitigation seems high to some. Do you know what other counties are using for ratio? I.e., what is the highest percentage ratio that Rick has used in Beaverhead County?
Well, that's a great question, and one that, in terms of Beaverhead County, I would love to hear Rick's response to that as well. We modeled our mitigation ratio off of other counties that have done farmland mitigation policies, and in California, a number of the rural agricultural counties have come up with this 1-to-1 ratio, and in Yolo County, where Davis is located, they started with a 1-to-1 ratio, and then they moved to a 2-to-1. So now, if you're going to build on farmland, you have to protect 2 acres of farmland for every 1 acre that you convert to residential or non-agricultural uses. I've never seen a ratio, any mitigation policy done on a less than 1-to-1 basis, and I think that the 1-to-1 is a good minimum threshold because it makes a lot of sense to decision makers and people, particularly as you look at federal law and the takings. In Montana and many other states are very private property right centric. We like to say everything's a taking. Anything that local government does is taking my individual rights away. And that's a highly misinformed idea of what a takings is. What the federal law looks at is there a nexus, and is it proportional? So did you get the dosage? Did you get the prescription right? And then did you get the dosage right? And so if you're going to build on farmland, are you going to address the issue of farmland, or are you going to require that they create some kind of a public trail system? So yes, obviously, if you're building on farmland, the prescription is right. You've got to conserve farmland, and then I think that the dosage is obviously right on the money. If you're going to convert 1 acre, for every acre that you build on, you've also got to protect 1. I think that would easily hold up in federal court under the takings. And then obviously Yolo County has even gone further to say, no, you know what, it's not enough. You need more land for agriculture than you do for residences. We're going to say you got to protect 2 acres for every 1 acre that's developed. Rick, I don't know if you want to hop on that question as well for Beaverhead County.
Yeah, Paul, we don't, have anything. I love your. The developers do like predictability. They like to know, show me in the book exactly what it is that I can or can't do, or what my requirements are. And don't have that exact one-to-one predictability. Like I said, it's a case-by-case basis based on the historical use of the land and out between the governing body and potential landowner. And in the one instance to date where we've had to bring this into play, it appears to be working.
Well, thank you, Rick and Paul. Let's move ahead now to Warren. Warren is a planner for Gallatin County, and he's helped the Amsterdam Churchill community in developing a neighborhood plan, which includes some very important provisions for agricultural land. So, Warren, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Kathy. Cassie, and like you said, I am a planner down in Gallatin County. And I want to stress as I start this that this is my story in one community. I could not have done this without a ton of local leadership. I'm just the guy that tried to facilitate it along, and it's an odd and very unique community. And so, keep that in mind as I talk about this. But I think the work that's been done down there is pretty awesome. So some really nice context here for the work that I've been doing. For about 30-odd years, 40 years, all Gallatin County worked on was citizen-initiated zoning, one zoning districts. The county had very little to do with anything. We started dabbling back in the early 90s. The county adopted the first Gallatin County Plan, and the county attempted to adopt what they called the permit system. It was the first attempt at countywide zoning that we'd ever attempted, and it completely belly flopped. 5 or 6 years went by. New round of commissioners. They tried it again. Gallatin Conservation Areas program is a very sophisticated, countywide, comprehensive growth management system. It was actually a lot of stuff similar to what Paul talked about. Total belly flop. Didn't work out at all. 5 years later, new round of commissioners all screwed their courage up, and we tried again. Total belly flop. What's killing this in Gallatin County is that we have a really big county, but if you take Ted Turner out of the mix, Ted owns about 50,000 acres in the county. If you take Ted Turner out of the mix, you only need about 95 of the top land of the largest landowners till any countywide attempts, and so you've got to count about 90,000 people. 95 of those people can. So that's what we keep running up against, and why it just never keeps working out. After the 2009 attempt, there was one more sort of ill-fated attempt at semi-countywide zoning for gravel pits that also totally belly flopped in 2010, and that basically brings us right back to where we are now. So our intrepid little citizens groups, and what has happened is that the county has, in the last few years, given quite a bit more support. I mean, back in the old days, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, citizens were just out there thinking of this stuff by themselves with no professional help, no legal help, and it was kind of a mess, at least from a comprehensive plan perspective. But in 2 years, the powers that be at the county have given their blessing to have a lot of county support, and that's what I've been doing throughout the last 5 years. So I've worked in primarily three different communities in the county, and the one I want to focus on is the Amsterdam Churchill community, because I think it's been the most unique and interesting and certainly successful. It's about 20 miles west of Bozeman, just in Manhattan. It's Dutch. It's 100 years old. Literally, a huge number of people out there. There's about 600 people that live out there, and I don't know, 500 of them are related. The old folks all still have Dutch accents. Like, it's a really remarkable little place. And so what these guys were really doing too was that as they was somewhat of an isolated community. They're off the beaten path, and they were watching the rest of the county just go gangbusters. And so in 2007, they approached the county and they said, we want to get started on a planning process. We want to do something about this. So, we scheduled a bunch of meetings. We had a bunch of folks show up. It was very successful. And off we go, 5 years later. The thing that really kicked it off was, right now here we're looking over the two communities. Amsterdam is the really tiny hamlet on the left. Churchill is the one that's more right in the middle, about 200 homes, and we're looking towards the Bridgers, out towards Bozeman and Belgrade. That 250-acre piece that's right between the two communities, there was a 100-lot subdivision was approved there in 2007. And a lot of the folks that lived out there looked at this and said, okay, well, if something is going to happen here, stuck in the middle of the two communities is probably the right, quote unquote, right place. And the one that did the subdivision, the landowner, family ground, she was as committed as I've ever seen a landowner to doing it in a way that complemented the community. And but nonetheless, it was a giant subdivision. And so I looked at this and said, we kind of dodged the bullet this time, because if we're something, this is pretty decent. But the next time around, knows what it's going to get. And if we don't have a plan in place, it's basically going to come down to whoever's got the money and the wherewithal to make change happen. And so that's what really kicked it off. I honestly don't know if we did anything really special with a lot of these meetings. I mean, we served everybody food. We lined them up and did really low-tech ways of gathering information. We did breakout sessions. I mean, we made everybody work. And it was really successful. The process lasted for about 2 years. We basically talked about, we started out with what's important to you in the community, what can you actually do about it, and what are you actually willing to do about it. It's that last question that's the big one. The process was structured. We started the thing off with about 4 different educational meetings. And actually, before I get into that, one thing to really stress is that farmland protection is, without question, one of the primary things that came out of the process. But one thing that I was really lucky with and really re-stressed constantly was this is a picture holistic process. And in some ways, I say I was lucky with some really unlucky things. We found out right at the front end of the process. I did a bunch of research and about some of their infrastructure, and we realized that their sewer ponds were leaking about 20 gallons annually into the groundwater. So 2/3 of their annual flow was just dumping into the ground and swept into the adjacent fields. So there was some really some crops growing right next to town, but nonetheless, you got to do something about that. And also, it's a really religious community, and 2 churches, and it's just school right in the middle of town, no sidewalks. And so every day, all these kids riding bikes. Every Sunday, you got all these people trudging along the state highway. You had funerals happening, and everybody would leave the church and then trudge along the highway down to the cemetery. We really looked at all these different issues, and we said, farm ground protection, sidewalks, sewer and water, really basic nuts and bolts things. That's how I continually talked about it, and attempted to try and help people think about the big picture. And frankly, I think that's one of the ways that it happened. I think if we'd focused, at least there, had we only focused on one thing, I'm sure what happened. But what we did over time, over the last few years, was we had a number of vocational meetings. We had our big kickoff. We had meetings where we talked about tools. We had meetings where we talked about recommendations. We've had twice monthly steering committee meetings that have been going on for almost 5 years now, 4.5 years at this point. We directly targeted the large landowners. We got a couple of grants for $5,000 a piece, and that really helped fund the mailings, and that's pretty much what we used it for. So we pushed that. Again, this is the technical slide, and the way I continually talked about it was, you start your vision, you get your policy, then, we didn't just bang on the zoning drum. We kept, we talked about partnerships between the county and the sewer district, the community group and the sewer and water district, the schools and the state. We just kept talking about all these different ways we could do things, investments, things that the community cared about that they wanted to do. The community, for example, they really wanted to walk in the middle of town. They just raised $20,000, really $20,000, passing the hat over 3 years to be their CTEP match, their Community Transportation Enhancement Program match, to build a $100,000 sidewalk. We just had a meeting last night that finalized a lot of that, and it's just awesome. And we at the end of talking about the field of partnerships and investments, I would always bring up, well, there's the requirements too, there's the policy, there's the subdivision regulations, there's the zoning, and talking about in that package there seems to work. These are the guiding principles that we ended up with in the plan. They're not necessarily that unique, and I have to admit, having done real on the ground community-based planning for 8 years now with Gallatin County, I have to admit to an amount of jadedness with visioning and a lot of that. I think communities are just so complicated. At this point, I just kind of feel like you go find some people that are ready to roll up their sleeves and do some work, and you just get to it. It really helps doing a lot of this stuff, but I don't know when the last time anybody looked at the vision page. It's like we just trying to just get some things done. The big one here is local control. That's the one that seems to just constantly resonate. So basically what we end up with is about an 80 square mile, 50,000 acre planning area, new planning jurisdiction. It's been formally adopted by Gallatin County. It's divided into the town core, of which we are looking at here, and then everything surrounding the towns. And so pretty huge amount of land that we're talking about being part of this. And it was interesting watching Paul's map, because you guys have, I think, a lot of thought into looking at the farm ground is, where it's just out here. It's just kind of everything. It's everything outside of town, and it's one of the last places left in the Gallatin Valley that is truly viable. And that's another look at it, looking north this time, and you really see that 250 acre piece right between the two that was the start of everything. And there's the Gallatin River up on the northeast, up in the right corner. Here's the sewer ponds that are sitting there. What the plan actually comes down to is in the rural portion of the area, there's a plan. We're writing the zoning as we speak. It's about to be hand-delivered to our county attorney's office, and then we're going to start public process. But the plan calls for lot per 160 acres. For each increment of 80 acres you get another development right, but the development right has to be clustered. So basically 160 acres has 3 total, but 2 of them have to be clustered, and we got that by, we really looked at the historic development pattern of the area. This was basically what it was, and so said, okay, as development starts ramping up, we're gonna codify that. This was a big way of getting it done. When we talked about standards, we've got stuff in there talking about protections for canals and ditches. There's a lot of the stuff that Rick talked about, and the big ones, especially with zoning, we didn't mess with uses. We didn't talk about, we talked about hardly any uses. We just said anything goes, just do it well. So the next couple of slides are not, they're not exactly indicative of the of a 1 per 160 type ratio, but it just shows what I would show these folks. We've got your standard ground out there. State development pattern looks something like that, and what we're really talking about is something more like that. Protects the ground, and I was lucky because I got an intern with MSU to help me with this. a couple of last thoughts here. This is what we had a good relationship with the Belgrade News, and this is what you get when you have a good relationship with a newspaper. This is what you get when you don't. This is front page Daily Chronicle with the new reporter, and that was something to have to deal with for sure. So get the press on your side. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for me. Kind of some parting thoughts. I mean, local leadership, absolutely critical. Try and show how it's connected. And the cool thing is just watching how different spin-offs have really happened. I mean, conservation easements have really gone up in this community since we started having the conversation. So something to just connect the dots for people. Farmland is related to housing, is related to sewer, and on and on.
That was a great presentation, Warren. Thank you so much. And it was just so much information. I'm going to encourage folks, if they have some questions for Warren, to stick on. But we're just going to wrap it up here real quick with our next steps, and then please feel free to keep think of some questions for Warren, and we'll address them once we wrap up here. So I'm going to hand it over to Paul to finish us out here.
Great, thanks, Cassie. And as Cassie just said, if you do have time after one, feel free to stick around and ask any of us questions, and particularly Warren. Some next steps for the Ag Land Network of Montana. We're just about to conclude our third and final webinar, and it could either be a series of interesting webinars, and that's okay, or it can be more than that, where we continue to work together and find ways to take some next steps and implementing good approach at our local levels to conserving farm and ranch land for our agricultural legacy in Montana. So next steps, the first one, we will be creating a citizen's guide to ag land conservation in Montana, and I hope this is as collaborative as it can be. I'll take a lead on it, but really, I'll be definitely reaching out to Warren and Rick, because what I want to be sure it does is show examples in local communities around Montana about how they've approached securing their agricultural legacy, and highlighting examples that then other communities around Montana can say, oh wow, that's pretty cool. Beaverhead, I really like the way Beaverhead County approached that. I may borrow some of their language and maybe tweak it, see what people think in my community, see what my decision makers think, and then adapt it to my county. And so the other thing I really hope that the Citizens Guide does is boil things down to be very simple and straightforward, so that Montanans can just get involved. I think a huge part of this is getting people involved. This is not, if we're just going to be policy wonks about it, then we will continue to enjoy being right without getting much done. And so we really need to inspire people to let their voices be heard and engage in local government. So really the central goal of the Citizens Guide is to be a simple tool to help people engage strategically. The second thing I hope we do as a next step, and this is largely dependent on you all and any others around the state who are not on this webinar, but just make headway in your local communities. So just taking that one step, back to the first step CFAC took in Missoula County that really just kind of spun out of control in a really beautiful way, was commenting on that one subdivision in 2007. That led us to then reviewing every subdivision that's been proposed on agricultural land for the following 4 years, and then moving on and developing our farmland conservation policies and bringing more and more people on board with us and reaching out to the community and et cetera, and educating our elected officials. So what's one step And, everybody, our communities around Montana are all at a different place. Some people have already begun to take those steps, others haven't. So how do we, wherever you're at, how do we help support you in making that next step and being a resource for you? So Cassie's going to be making follow-up phone calls with a number of people around the state. Hopefully you're on our list and she'll call you. And just is there anything from the webinars that has resonated with you where you want to help make that step, and here's how we can help. And then lastly is we need to have on our radar screen the 2013 legislature. There is no doubt that the Montana Association of Realtors is going to come back with legislation to strip agriculture from subdivision review criteria, and obviously that's the main teeth I think especially in Rick's presentation and mine, you can see that without requiring subdivisions to consider, to address the impacts to agriculture, and for elected officials at the local level to have to consider those impacts and give them the authority to require mitigation, the teeth really fall out of this, and we've already got losing enough farmland as it is. So we need to keep that, and we need to know that it's going to come back. So the way we're going to defeat it again in 2013 is for us to be organized at the local level, and we need to talk to our friends and colleagues and have them call their local officials. So please have that on your radar screen, and the Ag Land Network will help organize that effort when it does come up. So that's it. We're after 1 o'clock. I know many of you probably have to go, but if you don't have to go, stick around, ask any of us questions, and we can continue the conversation.
Thanks, Paul. We do have a couple of questions here. So I don't know, Warren and Rick, if you want to come back on the line. One of our questions for Warren is, are you aware of any granting sources that can be used with conservation easements which conserve ag land?
With conservation easements, main thing that Gallatin County uses is we passed our open space bonds back in 2001, I believe. We've done it twice now, and so twice Gallatin County has taxed itself $10 million, so $20 million total, because it's a bond that has to be bonded to other sources. So, it applies the cash, but the Gallatin Valley Land Trust is the organization that's out there working it and doing it, and what they always do is they're the ones that would find federal money or the state money to match it up with, and so usually the ratio ends up being something like, if an easement is worth $1 million, a quarter of that would be open bond money, a quarter of that would be state, a quarter of that would be federal, and a quarter of that would be donated. I'm not really aware of easement money just because I don't deal with easements, but that's what I know.
Okay. There's another question here, and it looks like there is a comparison to something going on in Missoula. Currently, the Missoula commissioners want to charge the Target Range Neighborhood Plan Working Group to complete zoning recommendations in the Target Range Neighborhood Plan, which the commissioners adopted back in 2010. Do the Gallatin commissioners assess fees for the citizen-initiated zoning there?
No, they don't. And they've said it. They've said the idea has come up a couple of times, and the commission has said strongly that they support citizen-initiated work, and they aren't going to deter it by charging anything. They're going to support by having their staff help, and they're willing to pay for that themselves.
Okay. Well, that's it for the questions that I got here. So if no one else has any other thoughts, thank you again, Rick, Warren, and everybody for joining on today, and Paul. Nothing else, and I'll say goodbye. All right. Everybody have a good day. Thanks.
Thanks, Cassie.
Thanks, everyone.